Hey everyone, it's Steven here, and in this video, I'll be demonstrating the So You Want to Be a SOC Analyst Cybersecurity Home Lab, originally provided by Eric Capuano, founder of OpenSOC. I found out about this lab via Gerald Auger, who hosts a professional cybersecurity themed YouTube channel. The lab information and instructions are presented in Eric's blog, which I'll leave in the description. The lab is aimed at aspiring Security Operations Center analysts and features the use of a small virtualization environment with 2 virtual machines in which we'll be emulating an adversary for creating malware and crafting detections, blocking an attack, deploying sensors, ingesting telemetry, creating detection and response rules, querying for indicators of compromise, and triggering Yara scans with a detection rule. So my host system is Mac OS, and I'm running my virtual machine on VMware Fusion. I'll leave a link in the description for the pro versions of VMware for Windows and Mac. I found that VMware happens to run smoother on default settings on my MacBook Pro, better than VirtualBox does. For the attack VM, I installed Ubuntu Server 22.04.1 via the ISO image. During the install, I left everything on default and changed the network IPv4 settings to manual and entered in the provided DHCPv4 address in the upper left corner into the address portion. The settings for the subnet and gateway fields can't be found on the macOS version of VMware settings, but can be located in the file system in the VMnet8 folder in the files named DHCPD and NAT. The subnet IP will need a /24 added to it. For my name, I entered in user. For my server name, I entered in attack. For my username, I entered in user. For a password, I entered in the word password in all lowercase. I clicked yes for installing SSH server. Once the OS is installed, it reboots and I logged in with the username and password. I made sure DNS and outbound pings worked by pinging google.com and got the following output. For the Windows 11 VM, I just installed a Windows 11 ISO trial version and without any internet connectivity to have a default user rather than having to use a Microsoft account. After successfully installing Windows, the first thing we'll be doing is disabling Microsoft Defender so it won't interfere in any of our attacks. We'll click the Start menu icon, click Settings, click Privacy and Security on the left, click Windows Security, click Virus and Threat Protection. Under Virus and Threat Protection Settings, click Manage Settings. Toggle off the tamper protection switch. When prompted, click yes, as well as turning off all the other options. Next, we'll permanently disable Defender via Group Policy Editor. Again, we click the Start menu icon, type CMD into the search bar within the Start menu, right-click Command Prompt, and click Run as Administrator. We'll run the following command. Next, inside the local group policy editor, we'll click Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, Microsoft Defender Antivirus. We'll double-click Turn off Microsoft Defender Antivirus. Select Enabled. By enabling this policy setting, Microsoft Defender Antivirus does not run and will not scan computers for malware and other potentially unwanted software. Click Apply, then click OK. Next, we'll permanently disable Defender via Registry. From the same administrative command prompt we previously opened, copy and paste this command and press Enter. Next, we'll prepare to boot into safe mode to disable all Defender services. Click the Start menu icon, then type msconfig into the search bar within the Start menu. Go to Boot tab and select Boot Options. Check the box for Safe Boot and Minimal. Click Apply and OK. The system will restart into safe mode. Now in safe mode, we'll disable some services via the registry. Click the Start menu icon, type REGEDIT into the search bar and hit enter. For each of the following registry locations, you need to browse to the key and find the start value and change it to 4. Now we'll leave safe mode the same way we got into it. Click the Start menu icon and type msconfig into the search bar within the Start menu. Go to the Boot tab and select Boot Options. Uncheck the box for Safe Boot. Click Apply and OK. The system will restart into normal desktop environment and we will be Defender free. From an administrative command prompt, we'll prevent the VM from going into sleep standby mode by entering the following. Next, we'll install the admin tool known as Sysmon. Eric suggests it as a must-have analyst tool for getting very granular telemetry. We'll launch an administrative PowerShell console for the following commands. Click the Start menu icon. Type PowerShell into the search bar within the Start menu, right-click Windows PowerShell, and click Run as Administrator. We'll download Sysmon with the following command. Then unzip the Sysmon zip. Then download Swift on Security's Sysmon configuration. Then install Sysmon with Swift's configuration. Then validate Sysmon 64 service is installed and running. Then check for the presence of Sysmon event logs. For our endpoint detection and response, we'll be using the SecOps Cloud Platform Lima Charlie. We'll sign up for an account. Once logged into Lima Charlie, create an organization and enter in a unique name. For data residency, I put USA. Demo configuration is disabled. Template is Extended Detection and Response Standard. Once the organization is created, click Add Sensor. We'll select Windows, select Create New, and enter in Windows VM-Lab1. The name of the x86 installer has changed since the lab was written, so for this step, I directly downloaded the file first. Then in the Windows VM, open Administrative PowerShell prompt and paste the following commands. Then shift into a standard command prompt by running this command, cmd.exe. Next, I'll paste in the name of the installer file with the .exe. Then, after a space, paste in the command line argument from Lima Charlie. This should be the expected output. If everything worked correctly, in the Lima Charlie web UI, you should also see the sensor reporting in. Next, we'll configure Lima Charlie to also ship the Sysmon event logs alongside its own EDR telemetry. In the left side menu, click Artifact Collection. Next, we'll click Add Artifact Collection Rule. The name will be Windows/Sysmon-logs, Platforms Windows. Path pattern, welcome Microsoft Windows Sysmon operational. Retention period 10, then we'll click Save Rule. Lima Charlie will now start shipping Sysmon logs, which provide EDR-like telemetry, some of which is redundant to Lima Charlie's own telemetry, but Sysmon is still a very powerful visibility tool that runs well alongside any EDR agent. The other reason we are ingesting Sysmon logs is that the built-in Sigma rules we previously enabled largely depend on Sysmon logs, as that is what most of them were written for. At this point, I saved a snapshot of my Windows VM in case of any errors. That way, I can always revert to this clean snapshot later on to get back to a good state if need be. From a separate Linux VM, I used SSH to access the Ubuntu server. This can also be done using your host system's terminal. Using the assigned IP address we copied down in the Linux VM installation process, we'll SSH onto the VM to make future CLI activities easier by copying and pasting. We'll open a command prompt and run. Now, from within this new SSH session, we'll proceed with the following instructions to set up our attacker C2 server. First, let's drop in a root shell to make life easier by entering in. Run the following commands to download Sliver, a command and control framework by Bishop Fox. We'll copy and paste the entire block as there is line wrapping occurring. Now, we'll create a working directory that we'll use in future steps. Now we're going into adversarial mode, so we'll go into an SSH session on the Ubuntu server VM. We'll drop into a root shell and change directory to our Sliver install. Then we'll launch Sliver server. Now, we'll generate our first C2 session payload within the sliver shell above. Be sure to use the Ubuntu server IP address we statically set earlier. We'll confirm the new implant configuration by entering implants. Now we have a C2 payload we can drop onto our Windows VM. We'll do that next. We'll go ahead and exit Sliver for now by entering in exit. To easily download the C2 payload from the Linux VM to the Windows VM, we'll use a Python trick that spins up a temporary web server. Now we'll switch to the Windows VM and launch an administrative PowerShell console. We'll run the following command to download your C2 payload from the Linux VM to the Windows VM, swapping your own Linux VM IP and the name of the payload we generated in Sliver a few steps prior. I'll once again snapshot my Windows VM before executing the malware. The snapshot name will be malware staged. Now that the payload is on the Windows VM, we must switch back to the Ubuntu server VM SSH session and enable the Sliver HTTP server to catch the callback. First, terminate the Python web server we started by pressing Ctrl-C. Now, relaunch Sliver and start the HTTP listener. Return to the Windows VM and execute the C2 payload from its download location using the same administrative PowerShell prompt we had from before. This must be done from an administrative command prompt or subsequent steps will fail. Within a few moments, we should see our session check-in on the Sliver server. We'll verify your session in Sliver, taking note of the session ID by entering in Sessions. To interact with your new C2 session, we'll type in the use command along with our session ID into the Sliver shell. We are now interacting directly with the C2 session on the Windows VM. Let's run a few basic commands to get our bearing on the victim host. To get basic info about the session, enter in info. To find out what user your implant is running as and learn its privileges, type who am I followed by get privs. If the implant is properly run with admin rights, we'll notice we have a few privileges that make further attack activity much easier, such as SE debug privilege. If you do not see these privileges, make sure you ran the implant from an administrative command prompt. We'll identify our implant's working directory by entering pwd. Examine network connections occurring on the remote system by entering in netstat. Notice that Sliver cleverly highlights its own processes in green. We'll identify running processes on the remote system by entering in ps-t. Once again, we notice that Sliver highlights its own process in green and indicates security products. This is how attackers become aware of what security products a victim system may be using. We can observe our EDR telemetry so far by going into Lima Charlie. Click Sensors on the left menu. Click your active Windows sensor. On the new left side menu for this sensor, click Processes. Here we can spend some time exploring what is returned in the process tree. Eric provides a link to a free poster download from the SANS Institute, which is a visual guide for what's normal and not within a Windows host system. Here we can find our C2 implant, which is active on the network. Now we click the Network tab on the left side menu. Once again, using Ctrl-F to search and find our implant name. Now we'll click the File System tab on the left side menu. Browse to the location we know our implant to be running from. Inspect the hash of the suspicious executable by scanning it with VirusTotal. While it says Scan with VirusTotal, what it's actually doing is querying VirusTotal for the hash of the exe. If the file is a common or well-known malware sample, you'll know it right away. However, item not found on VT does not mean that this file is innocent, just that it's never been seen before by VirusTotal. This makes sense because we just generated this payload ourselves, so of course it's not likely to be seen by VirusTotal before. This actually makes a file even more suspicious because nearly everything has been seen by VirusTotal, so your sample may have been custom crafted and targeted. Now we'll click Timeline on the left side menu of our sensor. This is a near real-time view of EDR telemetry and event logs streaming from the system. We can filter this timeline with known indicators of compromise, such as the name of our implant. If we scroll back far enough, we should be able to find the moment your implant was created on the system and when it was launched shortly after, and the network connections it created immediately after. We can examine the other events related to your implant process, and we'll see it as responsible for other events such as sensitive process access from when we enumerated our privileges in an earlier step. This particular event will be useful later on when we craft our first detection rule. We'll go back to our Sliver C2 session launched earlier and do some adversarial activity we would want to be able to detect. We'll get back onto an SSH session on the Ubuntu VM and drop into a C2 session on your victim. Retrace your steps from earlier if need be. Run the following commands within the Sliver session on your victim host. We'll do something adversaries commonly do for stealing credentials on a system. Dump the LSAS exe process from memory. This will dump the remote process from memory and save it locally on your Sliver C2 server. If it fails for an unknown reason, even after launching your C2 payload with admin rights on the Windows system, it likely still generated the telemetry we needed. Now that we've done something adversarial, we'll switch over to Lima Charlie to find the relevant telemetry, since the LSAS exe is a known sensitive process often targeted by credential dumping tools. Any good EDR will generate events for this. Drill into the timeline of your Windows VM sensor and use the event type filters to filter for the sensitive process access events. There will likely be many of these, but pick any one of them, as there isn't much else on this system that will legitimately be accessing LSAS. Now that we know what the event looks like when credential access occurred, we have what we need to craft a detection and response rule that would alert any time this activity occurs. We'll click on the Build a DR Rule button from this event. In the Detect section of the new rule, remove all contents and replace them with this. We're specifying that this detection should only look at sensitive process access events where the victim or target process ends with LSAS exe. In the Response section of the new rule, remove all contents and replace them with this. We're telling Lima Charlie to simply generate a detection report anytime this detection occurs. We could ultimately tell this rule to do all sorts of things, like terminate the offending process chain and so on. Now let's test our rule against the event we built it for. Lima Charlie has carried over that event, and it provides a quick and easy way to test the DNR logic. I will click Target Event below the DNR rule I just wrote. Here we will see the raw event we observed in the timeline earlier. We'll scroll to the bottom of the raw event and click Test Event to see if our detection would work against this event. Notice that we have a match and that the DNR engine tells you exactly what it matched on. We'll scroll back up and click Save Rule and give it the name LSAS Accessed and be sure it is enabled. We'll now return to our Sliver server console, back into our C2 session, and rerun our same proc dump command from earlier. If at some point the C2 session dies, just relaunch the malware with the steps from earlier. After rerunning the proc dump command, go to the Detections tab on the Lima Charlie main left side menu. If you are still in the context of your sensor, click Back to Sensors at the top of the menu, then you'll see the Detections option. We've just detected a threat with our own detection signature. We'll expand a detection to see the raw event. We can also go straight to the timeline where this event occurred by clicking View Event Timeline from the detection entry. So far, we've learned that we can craft our own detection rules to identify the moment a threat unfolds on our Windows system. But we're now interested in blocking the threat rather than just generating an alert. We're going to craft a rule that would be very effective at disrupting a ransomware attack by looking for a predictable action that ransomware tends to take: deletion of volume shadow copies. Volume shadow copies provide a convenient way to restore individual files or even an entire file system to a previous state, which makes it a very attractive option for recovering from a ransomware attack. For this reason, it's become very predictable that one of the first signs of an impending ransomware attack is the deletion of volume shadow copies. A basic command that would accomplish this is by entering this. This command is not one that will be run often, if ever, in healthy environments, but baselining is still crucial as some backup software and other applications may do things like this on occasion. So now we have a prime candidate for a blocking rule: low false positive prevalence, high threat activity. And now we'll get back into a Sliver C2 shell. Getting back into an SSH session on the Ubuntu VM, we'll go into a C2 session on our victim, retracing our steps from earlier if need be. In our Sliver C2 shell on the victim, run the basic command we're looking to detect and block by entering in shell. When prompted with "this action is bad OPSEC, are you an adult?" type yes or Y and hit enter. In the new system shell, we'll run the following command. The output is not important as there may or may not be volume shadow copies available on the VM to be deleted, but running the command is sufficient to generate the telemetry we need. Next, we'll run the whoami command to verify we still have an active system shell. We'll browse over to Lima Charlie's detection tab to see if default Sigma rules picked up on our activities. We'll click to expand the detection and examine all of the metadata contained within the detection itself. One of the great things about Sigma rules is they are enriched with references to help you understand why the detection exists in the first place. One of the reference URLs contains a Yara signature written by Florian Roth that contains several or more possible command lines that we want to consider in a very robust detection rule. View the offending event in the timeline to see the raw event that generated this detection. Next, we'll craft a detection and response rule from this event. From this DNR rule template, we can begin crafting our response action that will take place when this activity is observed. Add the following response rule to the response section. The action reports section simply fires off a detection report to the detections tab. The action tasks section is what is responsible for killing the parent process responsible with the deny tree for the VSS admin delete shadows all command. Save your rule with the following name. Now we'll return to our Sliver C2 session and rerun the command and see what happens. We'll run the command to delete volume shadows. The command should succeed, but the action of running the command is what will trigger our DNR rule. Now, to test if our DNR rule properly terminated the parent process, check to see if you still have an active system shell by rerunning the whoami command. If our DNR rule worked successfully, the system shell will hang and fail to return anything from the whoami command because the parent process was terminated. This is effective because in a real ransomware scenario, the parent process is likely the ransomware payload or lateral movement tool that would be terminated in this case. Terminate your now dead system shell by pressing Ctrl D. Next, we're going to take advantage of a more advanced capability of our EDR sensor, which is to automatically scan files or processes for the presence of malware based on a Yara signature. Yara is a tool primarily used for identifying and classifying malware based on textual or binary patterns. It allows researchers and security professionals to craft rules that describe unique characteristics of specific malware families or malicious behaviors. These rules can then be applied to files, processes, or even network traffic to detect potential threats. When analyzing a compromised system, Yara helps in sifting through large amounts of data to find malicious artifacts by matching them against a set of predefined rules. This ability to create customized detection signatures is particularly useful in threat hunting and incident response, enabling swift identification of known and even previously unknown malicious elements. We are going to prepare our Lima Charlie instance for detecting certain file system and process activities in order to trigger Yara scans. Since we already know we're dealing with the Sliver C2 payload, we can be more targeted in our exercise by using a signature specifically looking for Sliver. Within Lima Charlie, browse to Automation, Yara Rules. Under Automation, Yara Rules, click add Yara rule. Name the rule sliver. We'll copy and paste the contents of this code into the rule block and then save the rule. Now, we'll create one more Yara rule that we'll use later on for a more specific purpose. Name the rule sliver process. We'll copy and paste the contents of this code into the rule block. Now, before we use these Yara rules, we want to set up a few generic DNR rules that will generate alerts whenever a Yara detection occurs. Browse to Automation DNR Rules. Create a new rule. In the detect block, paste the following. Notice that we're detecting on Yara detections not involving a process object. That'll be its own rule shortly. In the respond block, we'll paste the following. We'll save the rule and title it Yara detection. Create a new rule. In the detect block, paste the following. We notice that this detection is looking for Yara detection specifically involving a process object. In the respond block, we'll paste the following. We'll save the rule and title it Yara detection in memory. We can test our signature by initiating a manual Yara scan using the EDR sensor. This will let us know everything is working up to this point. In Lima Charlie, we'll browse to the sensors list and click on our Windows VM sensor. Now we'll access the EDR sensor console, which allows us to run sensor commands against this endpoint. We'll run the following command to initiate a manual Yara scan of our sliver payload. Hit enter twice to execute this command. The output indicates a positive hit on one of the signatures contained within the sliver Yara rule. Now, we'll also confirm that we have a new detection on the detection screen. To automatically Yara scan downloaded EXEs, we'll browse to Automation DNR Rules. We'll create a new rule and in the detect block, paste the following. We notice that this detection is simply looking for new EXE files to appear in any user's download directory. In the respond block, we'll paste the following. This response action generates an alert for the EXE creation, but more importantly, kicks off a Yara scan using the sliver signature against the newly created EXE. Save the rule and title it Yara scan downloaded EXE. To automatically Yara scan processes launched from the downloads directory, we'll browse to Automation DNR Rules. We'll create a new rule and in the detect block, paste the following. This rule is matching any process that is launched from a user downloads directory. In the respond block, paste the following. Notice in this rule, we're no longer scanning the file path, but the actual running process by specifying its process ID. We are also now using the other Yara rule we created, sliver process. The Yara rules switched here due to the NCSC rules not firing on running versions of sliver due to the specific logic they've used in the match condition. The logic has been loosened to detect strings that should be present in a running sliver beacon. We'll save the rule and title it Yara scan process launched from downloads. We won't re-download our sliver payload, but we'll simulate this activity by moving it to another location, then putting it back into the user downloads folder. We'll run the following PowerShell command to move our sliver payload from downloads to documents. We'll now put it back to generate the new document event for an EXE being dropped into the downloads folder. Now we'll head over to our detections tab and see what happened. We should see an initial alert for EXE dropped in downloads directory, followed shortly by a Yara detection once the scan began and found sliver inside the EXE. Now we'll test our new process rule to scan running processes launched from downloads. We'll launch an administrative PowerShell prompt. First, we'll kill any existing instances of our sliver C2 from previous labs. We'll execute our sliver payload to create new process event. We need to trigger the scanning of a process launch from the downloads directory. We should see an initial alert for execution from downloads directory, followed shortly by a Yara detection in memory once the scan kicked off and found sliver inside the EXE.